another script that runs our accessibility tests locally, and all that does is call our generation command, runs our accessibility test suite, and opens our report. And when we run this test, we get the report that opens up, and it looks something like this. And here we can see that the home page passed, but our About and Keyboards pages failed. And if we were to click into one of those failing results, we can see that it pulls up the exact errors and the exact elements that are failing. So in this case, we see the DOM here on the left. All of those images are missing alt text. Very sad for accessibility. And so the test report calls out, like, here's the exact error, and it enumerates all of the objects, all of the DOM elements that failed. And then we go in and we add our alt text, and you see it populated in the DOM, and we rerun the tests and get all green checks. So now we have a pretty good framework for how we handle running these automated tests, and we have it all working for accessibility tests, so we can kind of shift gears a little bit and take what we've learned and start writing some visual regression tests. Now the goal here is going to be pretty similar. We go to each page on our site, we take a screenshot of that page, we compare it to a baseline image that exists for that page, and see if there's any pixel differences. And this is going to help us really easily verify that any visual changes that happen were intentional, and if not, we can go ahead and fix that bug. So again, these are the 3 pages on our site, and we're going to make the tests scalable just like last time, so we'll use the same approach, but this time we'll navigate to the route, and we'll use the built-in screenshot tool that comes directly from Playwright. We're just going to go ahead and clean up the file name a little bit so it's more readable, and then all we have to do is assert that the new screenshot that we took matches the baseline that exists. And of course, the first time we run this, there is no baseline, and so that image will get generated, it will get saved as the baseline in our repo, and then future runs will actually do pixel difference comparison. And we'll add some scripts just like we did for the accessibility test, so it just makes sure we have our JSON file of URLs, run our visual regression tests, and open that report. So let's say we're looking at the About page, and I've already run the test for the first time, and this is the existing baseline that's in our repo. So maybe I made a change to my page, and I accidentally deleted the image, or maybe intentionally deleted it. If we rerun our visual regression tests, we will see that some pages passed, but the About page failed. And if we dig into that test, we'll see that we have the baseline image on the left and the actual result image on the right. And we can even see a full pixel difference that really highlights those failures. So now I can choose, yeah, this was an intentional change. I'm going to accept the new image as my new baseline and commit my code, or I can go in and fix the bug that introduced that visual regression. Now, this gets a little tricky, right? Because we're comparing pixel by pixel differences, and Playwright does let you set threshold differences, like tolerances that it will accept. But these kind of tests can still become very noisy and flaky very quickly. And it's definitely something that's more unique to visual regression tests compared to accessibility tests, right? Because accessibility tests, we're looking at the DOM directly, so we don't super care about like what gets rendered on the screen. But with visual regression tests, there's very little tolerance. And Playwright calls this out on their site. And there's tons of things that can cause this noise and flakiness. But for the purposes of this talk, we're going to focus on the different environments. And different environments could be a different browser on the same operating system, or it could be different OSs entirely. And I remember running into this where both my coworker and I were on a Mac with the same OS, same browser version, but they were on an Intel chip and I was on an Apple chip, and that caused rendering differences. And usually this manifests as like font rendering, font aliasing, maybe some slight layout shifting. So if you plan on having visual regression tests as part of your dev cycle and as part of your CICD process, like don't put your team through the flaky test nightmare. You need to create a standard, consistent environment for your tests to run. So that's where Docker comes in. And we certainly don't have time for a deep dive on Docker, and I'm not an expert on Docker, but this is going to show you how to just really quickly get it into this workflow. And I was able to do this for my team without being an expert on these tools at that time. So I think we can all get there together. So we're going to skip through like the setup parts. Let's imagine we have Docker installed and set up. This is the Docker file that we're going to use to actually run these Playwright tests. And some of the most important things to call out is we first want to make sure that we're using the Playwright image for our Docker container that matches the Playwright that we're using our tests. Then we're going to copy over all of our test-related files because we want these tests to run in our container. And then we're going to go ahead and copy over the production build of our site. And we'll kind of like talk a little bit more about why we use the production build later. But we do want to make sure that we're mirroring what our users are going to be seeing. And then we can go ahead and run npx playwright with the test type that gets passed in from the command line. So just like we did with everything else, we'll add some new scripts to help keep things very simple in our workflow. So there's a couple helper Docker commands that we just add for like the sake of brevity that will build our container, run our container, copy reports from our container to our local machine, and then some cleanup work. And then we just have two scripts that run the accessibility tests in a container and the visual regression tests in a container. And so with that, we have a consistent environment between different dev machines on our team. So my coworker and I, who are maybe on different OSs, can run our tests in the Dockerized container, and we should get the same results. But now let's talk about integrating all of this into GitHub Actions, because what we really want to do is make sure that people aren't merging in code that is introducing bugs, right? So we're going to focus on GitHub Actions, and we add a new actions by creating a new YAML file under this GitHub Workflows directory, and we'll have a separate YAML file for each action that we want to run. So the first thing we'll do is we'll set up this action to trigger whenever we push changes to any PR. Then we'll do some generic setup work that we need to do like really for any action in our repo. So this is going to like check out the code from the PR, install dependencies, all of that fun stuff. And then we just run our tests. And we see that here we have like the Playwright VRT container. That's the command that we created in our package.json. And then we have the test run, but there's still some more work that the action has to do to actually make this useful for us in GitHub. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to explicitly fail this job if the tests fail, but we still want to make sure we do like all of this other housekeeping work. So we still want to make sure that we copy the test report from our Docker container into our action. And then regardless of if anything else in the job failed, we always want to upload the test report as an artifact in our job run. And that's what's going to give us the access within GitHub to go into that action and actually see what the test report is. And that's great. We can like download a file, right? But who has time to download a file? I want to see my test results in GitHub. I don't want to download a file. I don't want to navigate somewhere else. So I will use this third-party tool called GitHub Test Reporter. And all it's going to do is take the test report that was generated and publish it as something that I can view directly within that action. And then because we're very good citizens, we do a little bit of Docker cleanup work to make sure we're not leaving any artifacts behind. So with all of this, in this repo, I have these actions, these YAML files already set up. So if I were to open a PR and push a change to it, we can see that we have two separate actions that get run. We have our accessibility tests and our visual regression tests. And I'm a bad dev, so both of these checks failed because I left some bugs in there. So we can dig into the test reports directly in GitHub. So we have the first test report on the left and the second one on the right, and we can see that there were some accessibility errors and there were some like visual differences in our code. And if I wanted to like dig deeper, I could still download the full test report and view it locally. But this gives me a pretty good idea of where the issue is. So I'll go in and I'll fix all the changes, fix my code, I'll push a new commit, and both the actions get rerun, and now I have green check marks. And then if I were to dig into those actions again, I can see the test reports that show that everything is passing. I can see how long my tests are taking to run, all those good metrics. And no flaky tests, which is nice. So this is great, right? We got both accessibility and visual regression tests working directly in our GitHub Actions. We can now verify that PRs are getting blocked for merging if those actions fail, and that if I were to push new changes, those actions get automatically rerun. Now, there's still some more areas we can optimize maybe for the future. So right now, both the accessibility and visual regression tests, they go off and they each build the production site on their own before running the test suite. And really what we would want is a separate action that's only responsible for building the production version of our site. Maybe then we can publish those production files as an artifact, and then after that action is complete, then we kick off the accessibility action and the visual regression action that use those artifacts for the prod site. And that will just prevent us from waiting around and using up more resources than we need to. And then thinking maybe a little bit more about the dev experience that we want to have here. Right now, the process for accepting a new baseline, like if we say, yeah, that visual change was intentional, I'm going to go ahead and accept a new baseline so other engineers can get this in their repo. It's kind of manual right now. It would be nice to have a little bit more advanced tooling for that. I've seen some custom stuff that we've written on previous teams, and I'm actually very curious if folks have recommendations on anything maybe open source that exists. To come find me afterwards. And then continuing to think about scaling, maybe we can start adopting other tools like Jenkins as part of our process as we grow and we have more complex scenarios. But hopefully this has shown you that it doesn't have to be that hard to introduce automated tests in CI/CD workflows. I was very strictly a front-end dev for a long time, and then I became the most senior person on my team that had no idea how like DevOps worked. And so I just had to figure it out for myself to make sure that we had these tools in our workflows. So I think if I can figure it out, you guys should be able to figure it out pretty easily. And this has been really nice for us because we can now focus on using these tools to make sure we're shipping high quality code while we have the time to go off and focus on developing new experiences, new features, and iterating on things that are actually going to add user value and not spending a bunch of time just manually testing things. So I'll leave this slide up for links to the demo repo that I worked with so you can kind of poke around. And then right after I get off the stage, I'll also upload the slides for reference. And I'll post them online, but please come find me throughout the conference. I have keyboard things. I want to talk more about testing. I want to talk more about accessibility, so please come find me. Thank you.